So welcome to the Library of the History of Human Imagination, gentlemen. Today I have with me Steve Bonner and Dr. Don Braum, and we're going to have a fascinating discussion. I just know it because we had a fascinating discussion leading up to this interview. So why don't we start and talk about something that I think all know, that this is an extraordinary time in the nation's history and probably the world's history as we begin to reinvent the idea of healthcare and wellness. Now, if you were to encapsulate why this is such a great moment in history, how would you do it?
I would touch on probably a couple of key factors. And number one, to get to dramatic change, you need broad awareness that things are broken and they need to change. And I think for the first time in our country's history, we now have 95% of the American population saying we've got to change healthcare. So you've got a combined will that's going to propel us along the path. Number two, we're right in the middle of the information revolution, and we're trailing a little bit in healthcare. But the reality is that it's here. Mm-hmm. And the average consumer who's going to drive this revolution now knows that they can get information they need, they're demanding information they value, and they're going to use that to propel change through this industry like we've never seen it before.
So we've got two big ideas. One is we've got the will as a nation to do something, and the American people, when they have a will, tend to move things. And the second thing is we've got this information revolution that's empowering patients in entirely new ways and forcing the system both on the clinician side to adopt it and the patient side to embrace it. So that's one side of the world. Don, the other side of the world, it's an equal revolution in the scientific world.
Absolutely. It's very clear that we have now the capacity to understand all human diseases at a molecular level, which is unprecedented. We no longer have to look at a patient as a member of a large population. We can define a patient as a very complex set of individual characteristics that we now have the capacity to measure, to define, and work with from the data management perspective.
So in some sense, it's the end of this industrial model of one size has to fit all because that's the only choice we have, and moving to a model where every car coming down the line can be personalized for that owner, and every model out of the showroom floor can be just what I want, only we're now talking about it at a molecular level, not at a macro level.
Absolutely, and there's no way that we would even thought 2 decades ago that we would have the potential to be able to manage that kind of a process. But as many of us in the field have begun to appreciate, the marriage of supercomputers and fundamental understanding of biologic processes at the molecular level has completely transformed the way we understand human diseases and the way we can customize them to individual patients.
So the difference I hear you talking about, Steve, is a difference where patients used to be passive, and now patients become active in the process. But they don't have to become active inside the clinical environment. They can become active before they even get there. But we've got to do it in a way that really makes them want to become active. They don't want to attend class, but they will watch interesting videos, they will read interesting material, and I suspect they will engage if we engage them at their level.
Absolutely. And there's another facet to this that's so exciting about the transformation of healthcare, and that is that it helps people understand that they don't have to go to a hospital or a clinic to affect a happy lifestyle and to affect wellness. So much of our system is structured to draw people there in order to gain access to information and care. And now, through all the distributed technology that we've got, people are able to sit in their home, and even if they're not feeling well, they can get information, they can much more efficiently and effectively move to a healthier place, and it starts to take cost, meaningless, useless cost, out of the system.
So engaging patients on one side, even before they become patients, all right, certainly is a critical driver for the system. You know, Don, is that true on the scientist side of the world too? This whole change in the nature of engagement and information, how is that playing out in the world of the scientist?
I think as much as anything, it is being embraced in the recognition that we are very complex organisms, and that a disease which affects us has impacts on our physiology in a number of different ways, and particularly through our psycho-emotional state. We now understand that the mind-body connection is not just some ethereal idea. We recognize that there are molecules that mediate this, and that those molecules and mediators can be affected by diseases. So when patients come and are empowered with knowledge and expect to be treated as multidimensional, complex organisms, they are really doing this because that is what they are physiologically. And if we don't understand, for example, the impact that fatigue has on the ability of controlling cancer progression, if we don't understand the impact that some of the neurologic mediators of depression have on the way the immune system functions and actually suppresses the immune function, we are shortchanging the patient. Our patients are coming armed with ideas which say, in effect, we are very complex and we do need to have control over our health care, because I can tell you better than you can tell me what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. I need you to integrate what that means in terms of my physiology.
One of the most feared diseases, if not the most feared disease, is the diagnosis of cancer. And yet I think in the population as a whole, there's very little full understanding of what it's meant by the word cancer.
I'm not sure that it is. I think that there is a great black cloud that hangs over that word for everybody, and so there's foreboding and all that goes with it. So you get people ignoring things and resisting things and so forth. But they're ultimately drawn to understand it. And oftentimes the educational process is most adept and most engaged by a family member of the person who's been diagnosed. And we see enormous appetite for information. Just give me information. Our little website hosts 1 million unique visitors a month now, and all we do is cancer. And there are only 8 million people in the US with a cancer diagnosis. So I think they have a general understanding of it, but once it's in their lives, they have this huge appetite for much greater, deeper information. And their capacity to understand is incredible. We occasionally hear practitioners tell people, you know, this is really complex for you, don't worry about it, I'm the doctor, you do what I tell you. And then you hear primary care physicians who say, I deliver a diagnosis of cancer, and they come back for a follow-up, and by the second meeting, they know more about their cancer than I do.
So that's a giant change. And I think you put your finger on something we hear about at TEDMed all the time. Medicine and health is no longer an individual activity. It's now become a group activity, okay? Because people have such extraordinary communication skills to create ad hoc groups. You literally can say, you know what, if I've been diagnosed with this early stage cancer, I'm going to find somebody in my world, a cousin, a brother, a father-in-law, a stepmother, whomever, who's going to become my Sherpa on this, who's going to become my guide. And they're going to learn and teach, and they love me and I love them. And suddenly the doctor is no longer treating a patient, he's treating a team. Okay? And that's a big change in the world. And you're seeing it on the front line, and I suspect you're seeing it in the translational side too, you know, where people are saying, well, it's no longer, when we talk to the patient about one thing, their sister is actually telling us what she's not telling us. Okay? That she is waking up in the middle of the night, but she just says, it's just heartburn. But it's not. She's, you know, so you're suddenly in the group business here.
And what it's really done is empower patients and their caregivers to enter into a dialogue, a very dynamic dialogue with not just their care providers, as you say, but with the rest of the world through what online media can provide and what focus groups can provide. And the motivation for patients is really driven by very empowering knowledge about the way cells work and the way cells can go bad. One of the common misconceptions about cancer that we've seen for decades is that if you have a cancer that begins in your breast and then it spreads to your lung, most patients would have said 20 years ago, well, first she got breast cancer, now she has lung cancer. That's a very rare comment now.
Right.
The empowerment of medicine and medical knowledge has made it very clear that this disease has the capacity to grow in multiple locations in the body. It has an amazing capacity to adapt to different environments, no matter how hostile one attempts to make them. And it's also empowered patients to say, what can I do to stay one step ahead of where this cancer is going to try to spread? Because if you have a disease which is known to metastasize to the lungs, for example, what we're seeing in our patients is a lot of people coming in and saying, I'm concerned that my lungs are going to be the next target. What can I do to protect my lungs?
Clearly, we're going to have to reimagine new solutions, and clearly we're going to have to embrace those people who practice new models, and clearly we're going to have to come up with ways to communicate better about the successes that we achieve in those new models and what we've learned that doesn't work in those new models. That's how the marketplace has always worked, and I don't think it's going to be any different in this case. It's just going to have to be conducted with checks and balances and care and scientific rigor, but that's not an excuse, I would imagine, for not doing it quickly.
Right. I mean, safety in automobiles is important too, and there's a role for government to
Safety
help
in
us
airplanes.
oversight
I mean,
that.
look at
Safety
the
in
airline.
airplanes,
The airline
yeah.
industry is the safest industry in the world, and the idea of hurtling around at 500 miles an hour in an aluminum tube 7 miles high doesn't sound like the safest plan ever devised, okay? But yet, you know, it's safer to travel on an airplane in an elevator, for God's sake. So, and there was a case where the private marketplace, regulated by, the FAA, allowed for industry to provide an extreme level of safety with, one might argue about the quality on a good day, but anybody who's ever traveled in a third world airline system comes back here and sort of likes what we have. So.
And I think it's also fair to at least pose the question, which model would drive innovation better? And clearly what I think the world of science has shown to us is that innovation is really never going to end in the mind of creative people who are given the tools to pose a hypothesis, do an experiment, and come up with data which leads you ultimately to a product or to a technology which is a game changer. If we have systems in place which say that it's going to take you an awful lot of time and it's going to take you tens of millions of dollars to be able to prove that, I think the innovative spirit will not be crushed, but it will be attenuated. Mm-hmm. And so the model that I'm hearing from Steve and from yourself with respect to a new way of imagining the business of medicine is also going to, I think, pay off significantly in a new way of imagining, bringing innovation into reality a lot faster, beginning at the bench and rapidly moving it to the bedside.
Steve, Don, I want to thank you both. First of all, it's a pleasure to have a scientist and a businessman both at the same time. It was enjoyable and I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank
So did
you.
we.
That was wonderful.